Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Jobin, and you are listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. This podcast is dedicated to helping family caregivers in Ontario. Through expert tips and resources, you will gain knowledge and validation for the ups and downs that come with caregiving. More importantly, you'll learn that you're not alone. It's so important to take this time for yourself. We're glad you're here. Today, we are joined by Amy Coupal and Erica Ehm to talk about the Undercover Kindness Project. Amy is the CEO of the Ontario Caregiver Organization, a nonprofit funded by the Ministry of Health that was formed in 2018 to support Ontario's 4 million caregivers. Amy is passionate about mobilizing change through knowledge sharing and building collaborative initiatives that positively impact the lives of individuals and communities. Amy has lived experience as a caregiver for most of her life. She helped to support her brother who had cerebral palsy and was also a caregiver to her mother throughout her cancer journey. And now she supports her father. Erica Ehm is a Canadian icon and entrepreneur who continues to inspire and reinvent after 3 decades in the public eye. After 13 years as CEO of YMC.ca and M&Co, Erica brings leadership expertise to her speaking, moderating, and hosting events. She is a seasoned speaker who motivates entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs to adopt a successful mindset. By thinking differently and facing fears which limit success, Erica helps businesses evolve. Erica's insights on courageous leadership and successful reinvention resonate in today's challenging landscape. Amy and Erica, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you both on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you both about what we're going to talk. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about. I hope it's okay that I say I've had a little sneak peek, and I think people will really love the project that you are bringing to life. And we really want to create a space here on Time to Talk where Ontario caregivers can connect and share. And I think that there's definitely a synergy here with your project, the Undercover Kindness Project. So hopefully through our conversation today, we can shine a light on caregivers that deserve recognition and make our caregivers and our listeners feel connected to one another. So I want to start out with the big question. What is the Undercover Kindness Project and why was this developed?
Well, I'll let Amy talk about it because even though I'm really involved, this was part of her big vision for how to get people to know about the OCO.
Thanks. We're so excited about this project, and it is one of those things that's brought together questions and priorities that we've been working on for several years now. There are 4 million caregivers in the province of Ontario, and they're doing so many different things. They might be caring for a child with a disability, a partner who's received a cancer diagnosis, an aging parent, or any number of other things that may arise in people's physical and mental health journeys through life. And these people are often not recognized. In fact, I talk to caregivers pretty much every week who say, I didn't even realize that I was a caregiver. So if we don't recognize that we are caregivers ourselves, then it stands to reason that other people might not recognize us that way as well. And so we've been, providing programs and services and resources to caregivers, but also to the people who interact with caregivers, whether that's healthcare providers or social service agencies or educators or police or transportation people. We all interact with caregivers in different ways. But one of the things that really comes down to the core of what caregiving is about and what caregivers often, need as one of those areas of support in their life is kindness. I can tell you from my own caregiving journey that the things that I remember are those interactions, those moments, those gestures where people did something unexpected that made a difference in my life and that really made me feel seen and recognized as a caregiver. So the Undercover Kindness Project is about saying, this isn't flashy, this isn't glamorous. The things that caregivers often tell us that they need are really simple. right? The phone call, the plants being watered, the meal that shows up, the picking up the mail off the doorstep. And so we wanted to bring awareness to the fact that kindness can be small, kindness can be undercover, but kindness can have a huge impact in the life of the caregiver and the person or people that they might be caring for.
And how does the project present itself? So it's a series, yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And at the end, we'll get to sort of how people can find it, but tell us sort of how it sort of is presented to the public.
Well, we've got some exciting things that we're ready to share, and I'm going to turn it over to Erica to tell us more about that. And then we're hoping that it will take on a life of its own.
It was a very exciting project, or is a very exciting project to be a part of. We're right smack in the middle of it. We've just really started. We launched it by my speaking. This is where my speaking or my public facing persona was very useful, because I was able to share my own caregiving challenges that I had with both my mom, who was dying of cancer, and my daughter struggling with mental health. So I really understood what Amy was just talking about, because I lived it. So my job was to let people know that the Ontario Caregiver Organization was there for them. And the way they are there for them is to remind everybody who has a caregiver in their life that they probably could use some support. And so what we wanted to do was have some fun with it and invite people to do kind of like a surprise and delight for someone in their life who has been really putting a lot of time and effort and heart and soul caring for somebody in their life. We would just surprise them and make their day and say to them publicly, "We see you." And in doing so, set an example for other people to say, you could do this as well. And I love the idea of just telling people, we see you. We recognize how hard you're working, and that you could use a little bit of support. And like Amy said, it doesn't have to be fancy. Like at the beginning, we were thinking, we'll get like a whole community rally together and do this. Like, no one's going to do that. I could never do that for somebody, but I can make them dinner. I can get my son to clean their driveway. It's the little things that make a difference. And so that is what we're doing right now. And so far, well, the crew has been in tears. That's all I can say to you.
And based on my sneak peek, can confirm myself as well. And I loved so much about what I've seen already. And it's great that you're both bringing your lived experiences as caregivers to this project, and also your individual skill sets as well. And I think combined, that's what makes it so magical. And I think what people will love so much about it. Can we explain a little bit further about why Undercover? Why are these kindnesses of undercover, and sort of how that takes shape in the entire process?
Well, this is a TV show or a video show, so you have to make it a little more dramatic than normal, so that you get the real, deep emotion, and you get the crescendo of music, and you can really see the surprise and the connection between the caregiver and the person who is surprising the caregiver. It's sort of like a heightened example of the kinds of things that you can do, because really, it should all be a surprise. Very rarely do caregivers ask for help. So it's kind of incumbent upon us, those who surround the caregivers, to surprise them with acts of kindness.
I think too, when we think about caregivers, and Erica hit the nail on the head when she said caregivers aren't going to ask, right? And this has come up in some of our conversations with caregivers through the Undercover Kindness Project. Is sometimes people will say, "Let me know if you need anything. Let me know if there's anything I can do." And 9.5 times out of 10, people won't do that for a variety of different reasons, right? And so this is a chance chance to take that proactive step, but there's a little bit of nuance or even a bit of a double entendre in the undercover thing, because caregivers are undercover, and these actions sometimes are undercover, and it isn't about glitz or glamour. If you show up with a coffee cup, it's one little moment in time, and sometimes the things that we do for people that make such a big difference in their lives, nobody else is ever going to see. Nobody else is going to ever know. And there's something really impactful about that people remember. I'll tell you the most memorable undercover act of kindness that I received when my mom was going through her cancer journey. We had a shared driveway with our neighbors, and my mom was in palliative care, and I never knew when I was going to leave or when I was going to go. And I didn't want to have to deal with street parking, which people who live in parts of Toronto will be familiar with. And they said, the driveway is yours for as long as you need it. And that wasn't, that's not part of the rules and the way it's supposed to be, but they just gave up that driveway so that I could come and go and never worry about where I was going to park or where things were going to be. And that made such a huge difference in my life. I never asked. They just did it. And I'll remember that as long as I live. And nobody else on the street or anywhere else will ever know. But that's an example of such a simple thing that makes a big difference in people's lives.
Yeah, I have a similar story. When my mom was really sick and I was in the hospital with my mom a lot, a couple of my girlfriends got together and they had some meals delivered. And I came home from the hospital, and then there was this big package waiting for me at my front door. I opened it up and I was like, oh my God, I burst into tears. It was so touching. And it said to me, oh, they notice, they can see what I'm going through. And, this is my opportunity to pay it forward.
The spirit of all of those things that you just mentioned really does live in the Undercover Kindness Project. And it is those little things. And you're right, no caregiver walks around with a sign saying, hey, I'm doing the work of 10 people right now. And it is itself an undercover act in many ways. So I'm amazed at the stories that I've seen so far. And I'm assuming that you've heard many incredible stories. How did you find the stories that you're featuring, and how did you go about choosing which ones that you wanted to show?
Well, I can talk about how we initially did it, and Amy can talk about how they chose the final people.
Okay.
So in my case, I went all over social media and spread the word. Do you know somebody who can use an undercover gift of kindness? And I will tell you that the response was so big that we had to shut it down 3 weeks before we were supposed to, because we were inundated. People just gushing over friends and family, coworkers, parents. I mean, it was incredibly touching, and I have to say heartbreaking, because for every person who was submitting somebody was somebody who was really struggling on their own, trying to support somebody who they really cared about selflessly. And so that was my role, and my part of it was to encourage people to tell us their stories. And then all those stories landed on Amy's desk. And Amy will tell you how she was able to make those very difficult choices as to who we would feature in our stories.
So we learned so much from that process, actually, that we didn't expect. And Erica highlighted the first thing, which was we never expected the level of response that we got, the number of submissions that we received. That was our first of so many surprises. So first of all, we had to kind of emotionally prepare ourselves to review some of the stories that were shared, and that was impactful for the team. And this is a team of people who get their gas in the tank by supporting people who are taking on this caregiving role. So they've heard so many stories, but these stories just took our breath away. And part of the reason that they did is because it was somebody else actually saying, I know this caregiver in my life. I see this caregiver and I see what they're doing. So that was striking. Then we really wanted to look at what was the undercover act of kindness that they wanted to do? Was it something that people could relate to? Was it something that people could say, I could do something like that? Or would it tug at your heartstrings or your brainwaves and say, oh, there might be something else like this for me in my life with the people that I know? Now, I'll tell you, it was a really interesting process for the team in engaging with the people who submitted, because of course, Erica and the team were going to show up with a set of video cameras. And those conversations validated some of the things that we've learned through the research that we've done in the last several years. We've seen from the provincial data that there are caregivers facing really challenging situations, high rates of burnout, high rates of financial distress, high challenges in balancing work and care and other family obligations. So I'll tell you frankly, that list dropped a lot when we started to have the conversations about the practicalities of doing these videos in terms of people's availability, people's, just the opportunity to balance coming in and doing something with the caregiving that they were providing, or the work that they were doing, or the other family or personal obligations that they had. So we saw those numbers drop like a stone, to be frank. And then we also navigated some of the things that we've also seen through the provincial research around stigma, that sometimes people don't actually want to be featured in this way, which I understand. There may be a variety of reasons that people say, thanks, but no thanks. I don't really want the public light shone on my story. And I respect that immensely, because everybody has to do what's right for them. What we found is we had a small group of caregivers who said, yes, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to share my story. I'm willing to open up my home, which is a huge vulnerability. And I'm willing to receive, which is one of the other things that I think as human beings, sometimes we have a hard time doing. And so that's where we started to build out the stories that we'll have the opportunity to share.
But Amy, what's interesting, you're saying that that these people would allow us into their home, but they didn't know that we were going to do something for them. The only thing they knew was that they were going to be interviewed about what it's like to be a caregiver. They had no idea that we were showing up with a team of people to do an act of kindness. So can I talk about, well, maybe I'll talk about it later, what we did for our first family. And it was incredibly touching. And I kept on asking the team when they chose this one person, I was like, the act of kindness that you're doing almost seems to be more for the person who is being cared for, not the caregiver. And I kept on saying, how is this going to help the caregiver? Because that's what this is about. We're not worried about the people who need the caregiving. They're being taken care of. The question is, who is taking care of the caregiver?
Managing Care is an online resource that provides information, advice, and support for caregivers in Ontario. It can help you connect with other caregivers and find resources to help you manage care, such as respite services, financial support, and other helpful services. Managing Care can provide caregivers with invaluable support and guidance to help make your caregiving journey a little easier. With Managing Care, you can be sure to get the help and support you need to provide the best care for your care recipient. Visit ontariocaregiver.ca to learn more. Well, let's get to your first Undercover Kindness Project, seeing as you've mentioned it. Tell us a little bit about it. I can tell that you're both excited about it. What is it that made it so significant for you?
I'll let Amy explain why she chose them, and I could tell you a little bit about what happened at the shoot.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you, this particular project was just the gift that kept on giving, because there were so many things that were discovered through the preparation process that we didn't even know were going to be as significant as they were. We chose this project because it was an opportunity to recognize a caregiver who was really part of their own sandwich, in a way, generationally, right? Caring for a parent who's an older adult with children and grandchildren in the mix as well, showing that, you know, sometimes caregiving is also not about a specific diagnosis, right? Caregiving can be just related to the aging process, or related to the way that life unfolds, and there's support that's required. But we saw the opportunity to recognize this individual as a representation of so many individuals who are caring for parents who are aging and taking on significant responsibilities that people may not see. And maybe that's a good place for me to turn it over to you, Erica.
So the person who nominated our caregiver was the daughter of the caregiver. Her name is Vanessa. And she has recognized that her mom works tirelessly to support her mother, who is in her 90s. Her mother is Nona. And Nona has moved into her mom's house. At the same time, her mom works full time. So she does not have enough hours in the day, but somehow she makes it work. When I talked to Vanessa in our interview, she talked about all the things that her mom does, not just for Nona, but for her family as well, her grandchildren as well. And I asked her, like, what kind of help do you give your mom? And she got a little teary because she goes, we don't really help her because she says she doesn't need help. And that was an aha, because as she was saying those words, she was hearing herself. And then we were able to speak to her mom. First of all, she was shocked when we came to her front door with a team of people, and we said, well, we told you, or your daughter told you, that we were coming to interview about being a caregiver, but really we are coming here with flowers, with cannoli, and we are going to repair the greenhouse in your backyard, which your mom loves so much. Your mom spends so much time in there. And she was in tears. I mean, just by the mere fact of us showing up and us saying, we know, in fact, it was her daughter, Vanessa, who said, Mom, I see how hard you're working. I see how you care for everybody. And now we want to do something for you. Whoa. It was everybody in the crew was crying at this point. And then we had a really great conversation. And her mom disclosed that she doesn't ask for help. She doesn't want to disturb her family. She just digs in and does the work. And even though she admitted that it's far too much work for one person and she doesn't have time to take care of herself, she just does it. And I think Amy would agree that that is one of the biggest problems being a caregiver, is the shame, the embarrassment. I'm not sure what the actual emotion is, where caregivers don't ask for help. They don't want to disturb, they don't want to infringe on the people around them. And so they kind of are martyrs in a way. And that doesn't help anybody. And the fact is that their families can play a substantial role in relieving some of the pressure on them. And I think that that was a really interesting learning for her daughter, Vanessa, who vowed to be a little more present and helpful for her mom. And her mom vowed to ask for help at the same time, and understood the importance for her daughter to be able to help her. So it was a great experience. And then Nona loved her gorgeous new greenhouse that the crew worked on tirelessly for 2 days. And by the way, the crew were only paid for certain types of work. They went way beyond, because this feeling of kindness and doing good is contagious.
And there are so many beautiful moments in that. And I know our listeners will really enjoy watching it as much as I did your first Undercover Kindness Project. I want to bring it back to this. You both touched on the idea of perhaps a stigma around caregivers asking for help, or whether it's a stigma or whether it's just something that is just not done. Why is this a thing? Amy, do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, we've talked to caregivers about this and received some really interesting answers. One thing I would bring this back to is that phrase, if you need something done, ask a busy person.
Mm.
And so a busy person, as soon as something is required, is going to say, okay, I know how to do that. And sometimes in our own minds, it feels like it's easier to get things done ourselves than to organize getting somebody else to do it.
Mm.
So that's part of it. But there is this component to caregiving that it is in and of itself kind of isolating and lonely, right? And when you're feeling isolated and lonely and you're seeing, the whole world kind of go on outside of the bubble in which you're living in, that can be a tough position to ask for help. But caregivers also gave us some really interesting insights, including that sometimes they've asked for help and not received it. Sometimes they've asked for help and it's come with a bunch of unsolicited free advice that they really didn't want or need, right? And sometimes the help would come at an additional cost to them. And I'm not talking financial. I'm talking about the emotional cost, or that it didn't bring more to them than they needed. It actually asked more of them, right? And so one of the things that I think is fairly consistent, that I would say from my own experience, but that we've also heard from caregivers, is take the cue from the caregiver. So for example, the friendly phone call. So do you want to talk about what's going on with the person that you're caring for, or do you not? Let the caregiver, and maybe not as crass as I'm saying it in that way, but let the caregiver set the tone. Because sometimes I actually might want to just talk to you about something on Netflix because I need to think about something else, or have a conversation about something other than the thing that occupies my time and my thinking so much of the day, right? But I think if we center the caregiver and we center what their needs are, then an approach or a way of providing that act of kindness can reveal itself. And this first example with the greenhouse, I think, does that so beautifully. And Erica, you highlighted this by saying, how does this matter to the caregiver? Who's spending time in the greenhouse? Nona. But what does that give to the caregiver if Nona is safe? Nona is happy, Nona is occupied, and now the caregiver has the opportunity to take care of any myriad of other things that they need or choose to take care of with that additional available time.
Yes, we've given her the gift of time. Nona gets the gift of the greenhouse, and her daughter, the caregiver, gets the gift of time and freedom. And that's a great gift for her.
It really is. And through my conversations on Time to Talk with just this myriad of different situations of people that are caregiving in one way or another, those feelings of isolation, of loneliness, of not having enough time, of overwhelm have often come up. In the concept of self-care, which is, a term that is sort of tossed around quite a lot. It can have a lot of meaning, but I think sometimes it's not just all bubble baths and a cup of tea. Although that can be it needs to be something that has meaning for that specific person.
So I'll tell you, Michelle, that's one. You've raised something else that came up in the selection process, because one of the things that the team asked of the individuals who did the nomination was, what's that meaningful act of kindness that you think this person could benefit from? And a number of those conversations were, I don't know, a spa day. And look, I like a spa day. I'm not going to pretend that I wouldn't like that. But caregivers tell us time and again that there's a lot of conflict around this term self-care. There's a, there's a whole other conversation we can have on another day about that. But, by and large, the spa day is actually not what people are talking about, right? So this greenhouse, the making sure that pets are cared for, making sure, plants inside and outside are taken care of, making sure that people are fed, making sure there's a shower bar where there needs to be a shower bar, or, those kinds of things. Those are the things that people talk about being meaningful in their lives. So when we came back to the stories that got selected, it really was meaning making for the people involved. And that's maybe an interesting takeaway for people who are thinking, what's an act of kindness that I could do? Think about that person in your life who's a caregiver and what's really important to them, in particular, in this caregiving journey right now.
And I could add a personal anecdote. For me, when my mom was going through cancer, she specifically asked me not to tell anybody. She was very private, and she wanted to deal with her illness quietly. So my sister and I were not really allowed to tell many people about this publicly, which put a huge pressure on us because I had to give up my job to a certain degree. So did my sister. But I did tell my very close girlfriends. And those phone calls with them where I vented to them and I cried and we laughed and we talked about Netflix. And, we talked about things that I wanted to talk about was the best gift. I didn't need any drives. I didn't need my driveway plowed. I needed emotional support. That was my self-care. I could get myself to a spa, but the loneliness and the isolation and the sadness. So, it's the saddest time of my life that I've ever had. My girlfriends were there for me. And so that doesn't cost anything. You don't even have to leave your house to do that, but to call or to drop a little card in the mail or just to do something saying, I see you. What can I do? Can I take you for dinner? Can I bring you something to eat? So simple and so profoundly meaningful.
I can relate to a lot of that. When my dad had lung cancer, those months were pretty lonely because it can be a conversation shut down for a lot of people. They don't really want to know if you want to talk about it or not talk about it or things like that. So I can relate to that sort of isolation. And I know that you just need someone to reach out. And what I think this project highlights is again, pinpointing what is meaningful for the caregiving in your life. And I think that hopefully people that are viewing the Undercover Kindness Project will think about the caregivers in their life and have that takeaway for them. But for our listeners that are primarily caregivers themselves, is there any advice that you can give them about how caregivers can go about asking for meaningful care?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the things we learned the most from caregivers is to ask in those safe places, right? And caregivers know full well where those are and who those people are. And then also, is there a way to talk about what's actually doable? Right. So for my friend who doesn't like dogs, they're probably not the best person for the dog walking. Right. And yet there are really creative solutions. My sister and I were definitely the active participants in the circle of care for my mom, as Erica, was in a similar situation, but she lives in Calgary. And so we negotiated, and this was a hard thing for me to let go of. She would do the virtual things and I would do the in-person things. So even those things where I knew I could do it, I had to challenge myself to say, no, she's going to do that because that allows me to kind of keep my balance a little bit better because I know she's taking care of those things. So I do think that that's part of it. But I think there is a challenge for caregivers when someone says, let me know what I can do, to kind of match that request with a request. And the other thing I want to acknowledge in sincerity with caregivers is sometimes people say that and your gut instinct might be, I'm not going to ask for anything. And I really want to honor that gut instinct, because Michelle, you said this in terms of, people, there is discomfort, right? Whether it's around whatever the individual may be dealing with, whether it's around their own concerns about their physical or mental health or mortality or whatever the case may be. And so, I really honor that caregivers make the best decisions for themselves in the moment. But I also want to add that kind challenge to say, are there those safe places to reach out? Are there those safe places to say, yes, I could really use this, right? And I also really want to acknowledge that there is a distinction here around caregiving and mental health. This is my own personal experience as a caregiver for someone with mental health challenges, and I've heard this from many other caregivers as well. There is stigma, and there are some people who feel super uncomfortable about having those conversations about mental health, or where the individual with that mental health challenge may really want to keep that private. And so I think there's a conversation that we could generate about how do we rally around and support caregivers who are caregiving for someone with mental health challenges, because that is its own unique road too. And I just want to call that out, because I know I've certainly talked to caregivers who say, when we talk about caregiving and it's these physical things, it doesn't feel like I'm a part of that picture. And so I really see those caregivers too, and see them as a part of this picture as well.
And I can speak to that because my daughter, like many parents, are struggling with teens with serious mental health challenges these days. I've been dealing with that with my daughter since she was about 13. Actually, on her 13th birthday, she started crying and just didn't stop. And it's been scary. And that for me was very hard when my mom was dying and my daughter needed to go to the hospital because she said she was going to commit suicide or felt like she had to or something like that. And I did something which I think is a little different than what Amy just mentioned, which is I was not embarrassed to talk about it. I talked about it, and I didn't care if it made the other people uncomfortable, because for me, it was important that people knew, number one, what I was going through. But also, I think if we are limited by the idea that mental health has a stigma to it, and we don't talk about it, I'm not doing anybody any favors. So I thought, for me personally, I will talk about it openly, and other people could say, oh, me too. Or they can say, oh, I didn't know that. How can I help? Or, any kind of opportunity for someone to be moved positively. So I challenge caregivers to consider if they are sort of self-limiting themselves, and to consider who are they protecting and for what reason.
That's a big one. That's it. Who are they protecting and for what reason? I thank you both for sharing all of that. And I think when it comes to those that are caregiving for people with mental health issues, the more we do talk about it, the more we move it into a category that isn't separate from other types of caregiving. You know what I mean? Because the more we remove the stigma, it shouldn't feel like something that is we need to be hush hush about. And I know one thing that you were passionate about is the idea of the science of kindness. And can you expand a little bit more on that and how it relates to the Undercover Kindness Project?
Well, there is research that shows that when you do an act of kindness, you get a hit of dopamine and serotonin, which are the pleasure centers in your brain. So not only are you helping the caregiver, you're actually doing something very selfish by making yourself feel good. So if you are wondering, should I call somebody or do that thing, I will guarantee that you will get a jolt of feel good dopamine just for doing it. So it's a win-win.
And, I think we have a great example of that in the folks who were involved in the first video,
Yes.
because whether it's family members or crew, people are coming back saying, how can I be involved in another one? How can I pay it forward? I want to do more of this. And it's because it feels really good.
It's so funny that you say that, because Vanessa, who is the granddaughter of Nona, or the daughter of the caregiver, she has already called up the producer of these series saying, how can I be involved? She was so touched by being involved with this. She wants to be involved more. So you're right, Amy. It is, kindness is contagious, and you can't go wrong. If you want to do something kind for somebody, don't overthink it. Just do it.
What an incredible ripple effect that is, to have the person who nominated your first caregiver now want to be involved in helping out with the rest of the project. I mean, that just speaks volumes right there in terms of the potential effect. And I hope it's completely and utterly contagious for everyone that is watching the series. What common themes have emerged throughout the project so far?
Well, I think we're still really at the early stages, so we hope that we'll see some more, but I would offer the following for now. One, simple is okay. Simple is okay as an act of kindness, and custom is even better, right? So if there's something that you know that's relevant to the person in your life that would really make a difference, then that's the place to lean in, which is why the example of the greenhouse was very unique and very meaningful to that person. Another thing that I think has struck me is there something you can do that has an ongoing impact, right? Whether it's, the example for me of the driveway, or even the greenhouse is one of those gifts that keep on giving, right? And so is there something that you can do that has that longer term effect? And I know everybody has to kind of find their way to manage through that. But the other is to really honor the caregiver and what they need, what's important to them in their life. And that includes honoring if a caregiver says, no, thank you, because I would really want that if people say, I really want to do this, and the caregiver says, that's not what I need, that's okay. Or if they say, I'm not sure what to do, and the caregiver says, what I really need is this, and it's not something super glamorous, that they're probably saying they really need this because it's the thing that's going to be impactful on their life. So having that dialogue with the caregiver and really honoring that they're the one who's balancing care, sometimes work, sometimes other family, sometimes other community commitments, taking care of themselves. And so they know. And so I would leave it at really listening to that caregiver wisdom.
Is there one particular thing, I think there's probably a lot that will be achieved with the project, but if there's one takeaway from both of you that you would like everyone to have from the Undercover Kindness Project, what would you say that it would be?
Do something nice for a caregiver. As simple as that. Don't overthink it. Just do it.
And I would say caregiving is more common than you think. I really hope that people recognize, oh, I'm a caregiver, if that's true for them. Oh, somebody else in my family is doing the caregiving and I'm not, might be true. Or my neighbor, my colleague, somebody else in my community. This is a chance for us to shine the light on the fact that a lot of people are doing this, and it goes largely unseen.
4 million apparently in Ontario. That's a pretty large number. So, and I think it's something that probably affects almost everyone at some point in their lives. And being a caregiver is something you don't really realize that you are until you're in it. So I think it's really something that will come to light when more people get to watch the Undercover Kindness Project. Is there anything else that you'd like to add today?
I'm just grateful to be able to talk about this and spread positivity in the world. I think it's so important. The world's dark these days, And it's initiatives like this and podcasts like this and people like Amy who make the world a better place.
And I'll add an acknowledgement of the caregivers who are listening, because I know there are people who listen to our podcasts to kind of have that connection point with other caregivers who may be feeling like they're doing this on their own. So we see you, we're here for you. And we have lots of different ways that we can support caregivers in the work that we do. That's why we exist. And so, we do that directly with caregivers. We do that with the people who engage with caregivers in their lives. We do that at the system level. And so we see you, we're here for you. And if there's something you need that we need to be thinking about, reach out to us and let us know.
Where can we find the Undercover Kindness Project? Is it too early to say, or is there anything we can let people know where to expect it?
We'll be sharing this over all the social platforms that we're involved in. So primarily Instagram, Twitter, maybe even LinkedIn. And we'll also be sharing on our website at ontariocaregiver.ca. We'll have tips for people for how they can consider an act of kindness that might be meaningful for the caregiver in their life. And then, of course, we'll also be connecting with caregivers who are finding out about us for the first time through this initiative and connecting with them on any information, resources, or support that they might need as well. So I would say home base, ontariocaregiver.ca is the place to go.
Wonderful. I can't wait to see the rest of it. Amy Coupal, Erica Ehm, thank you so much for being on Time to Talk today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can access more details about support services on our website, ontariocaregiver.ca. Until next time, I'm Michelle Jobin, and you have been listening to Time to Talk, a podcast for caregivers. We hope you have a wonderful day.